Hey everyone, you're watching the Space Channel. Moon landing conspiracy fans love to argue. How is it possible that 50 years ago humanity flew to the moon and back without a single accident, while today we can't pull it off? We have to build new spacecraft that still aren't flying. Could all 7 moon missions really have gone perfectly back then, if we can't even recreate them now? Here's where my recent debate partner was surprised. There were actually only 6 moon landings, even though there were 7 missions. That fact alone undercuts the idea that every trip to the moon was flawless. And the story of Apollo 13, the one I want to talk about today, shows just how dangerous all the lunar missions really were, and how it was almost a miracle that every astronaut made it home alive. Let's start this story from the very beginning. In 1961, NASA approved the Apollo program, whose goal was to land humans on the moon. It was broken into many stages, each testing specific technologies and bringing people closer to the moon. The first crewed flight was planned for February 21, 1967. Still, during preparations on January 27th, a fire broke out inside the spacecraft, claiming the lives of 3 astronauts: Edward White, Virgil Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee. As a result, crewed flights were postponed for a year and a half, during which only uncrewed tests were conducted. Crewed missions resumed in mid-1968, and on July 20, 1969, Apollo 11 touched down on the lunar surface. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin landed, while the third crew member, Michael Collins, waited for them in lunar orbit. The event was a true triumph for NASA. One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. It's no surprise that later missions received far less media coverage, and most people know almost nothing about them. Let's jump to April 11, 1970. James Lovell, John Swigert, and Fred Haise set off for the moon as the crew of Apollo 13. During launch, the first anomaly occurred. The center engine of the second stage shut down prematurely. The issue was handled by extending the burn time of the other 4 engines, and the mission continued. The first 2 days of flight went smoothly. The astronauts carried out routine tasks, and nothing hinted at trouble. On the 3rd day, the crew was instructed to stir the contents of the oxygen and hydrogen tanks. In microgravity, the fluids can stratify, and the sensors start giving inaccurate readings of how much liquid is in the tanks. Stirring sloshed the tanks and restored accurate sensor readings. During that stir, however, the oxygen quantity sensor in Tank 2 began showing anomalously high values. At the same time, the pressure and temperature sensors in that same tank looked normal, so the glitch was deemed non-critical. A few hours later, Mission Control noticed fluctuations in the liquid oxygen and hydrogen level sensors and decided to run another tank stir. 16 seconds after it began, the crew heard a loud bang and the spacecraft started to shudder. At first, they thought it was another prank by Fred Haise. He'd spooked everyone more than once with similar sounds by opening the pressure equalization valve. But this time it wasn't him. Alarms went off. Voltage on one of the 2 power buses dropped out, and the pressure in oxygen tank 2 read 0. Lovell reported it to Houston, and that's when the line that became legend was first heard. "Houston, we've had a problem."
Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem. We've had a main beam plus undervolt.
Roger, main B undervolt. Okay, stand by, 13. We're looking at it.
At first, everyone thought a meteoroid had hit the spacecraft, but that wasn't the case. With 2 of the 3 fuel cells no longer generating electricity, any hope of a moon landing was gone. The fight was now for the crew's survival. The spacecraft kept oscillating, causing uneven solar heating that threatened onboard systems and posed a risk to the gyroscopes, jeopardizing the crew's knowledge of the ship's orientation in space. Peering out the window, Lovell saw a jet of gas venting from the service module, which was what was making the spacecraft wobble. At the same time, The pressure in oxygen tank 1 was dropping rapidly and was expected to hit zero within a couple of hours. At the same time, the power output of the only surviving fuel cell was dropping fast. To buy some time, they decided to draw power from the command module's batteries, the ones needed for the return to Earth. After that, the crew began shutting down all non-essential systems to cut energy consumption. But even so, this would only buy a couple of hours at most. At a certain point, the oxygen pressure dropped below a critical threshold, and the system automatically switched to using oxygen from the tank intended for the astronauts to breathe. Yet the leak didn't stop. After several failed attempts to locate the leak and cut off the oxygen supply to that area, the crew gave up. It began executing the emergency rescue plan: transfer into the Lunar Module and use it as a lifeboat. Meanwhile, on Earth, efforts ramped up to find a way to bring the astronauts home. Engineers had to figure out how to save on virtually everything. The supply of CO2 filters would last only about 36 hours. Water used in the cooling systems had to be cut, at least in half, so there'd be enough to top up. The command module's battery power would cover only about 3 days, so electrical consumption had to be reduced. Even propellant, though there was plenty, had to be conserved, since no one knew what extra maneuvers might be required before re-entry. On top of that, the crew needed to be brought back to Earth as quickly as possible. The options where the spacecraft would brake and turn back toward Earth using its own engines were rejected quickly. They could have brought the astronauts home in the shortest time, but they were extremely risky for the approach to Earth, and re-entry and landing were extremely risky. So the decision was to loop around the Moon. Several plans were drawn up that differed in details but not in principle. Perform a gravity assist flyby of the Moon and come out on a trajectory with the right speed for a safe landing on Earth. The problem was that this extended the flight by about 15 to 34 hours, during which a lot could go wrong. Over the next day and a half, the crew and the engineers on the ground worked through an incredible pile of problems. A detailed blow-by-blow probably wouldn't interest our subscribers. It's crammed with technical minutiae that would take ages to explain. Around midnight on April 15th, another telling incident occurred. One of the Lunar Module's batteries exploded. This didn't cause serious complications, but it's yet another reminder of how imperfect the technology of that era was, something moon landing conspiracy fans love to ignore. Fortunately, the story ended well. On the evening of April 17th, the crew capsule re-entered the atmosphere and, a few minutes later, splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. The astronauts were later awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor in the United States, for their courage and exceptional professionalism. After the astronauts returned, a detailed investigation found that the accident was caused by a whole chain of mistakes and oversights made back on Earth. If we sum up everything that happened during Apollo 13, we can thoroughly debunk the conspiracists' idea that the Apollo flights were perfect and accident-free. And that's just one mission. Look at the others, and you'll see they weren't exactly smooth either. Conspiracy theorists focus on the overall success of the missions, not on how that success was achieved, or the gauntlet that had to be run to get there. By the way, a couple of fun facts about Apollo 13. Because of the malfunction, the crew reached a distance of 401,056 kilometers, 249,205 miles from Earth during the lunar flyby, the farthest from Earth humans have ever been. And in 1995, the story was made into the film Apollo 13, with Tom Hanks in one of the lead roles. That's all for now. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. See you next time.